I remember the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a laugh. But that laugh sliced through my dining room like a knife, cutting straight into my son's heart and mine. Tom, my boyfriend of 8 months, sat across from Mason at our small dinner table. I'd made lasagna, Mason's favorite, to celebrate his report card. It wasn't perfect, just solid B's and 1 A in English, but I was proud. Mason had worked so hard that semester, staying up late with his books, pushing through subjects that didn't come easily to him. Tom picked up the report card, glanced at it, and burst out laughing. Not a chuckle, a full belly laugh that echoed off the walls. "This is what you're proud of," he said, tossing the paper back onto the table like it was garbage. Mason's face went pale. His fork froze halfway to his mouth, then slowly lowered back to his plate. The warmth that had filled our home just seconds before drained away, replaced by something cold and sharp. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words caught in my throat. Tom kept laughing, shaking his head like he'd just heard the funniest joke. Mason excused himself quietly, his chair scraping against the floor. I heard his bedroom door close, then the muffled sound of crying through the walls. I followed Mason to his room and found him curled up on his bed, face buried in his pillow. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. I sat beside him, running my hand through his hair the way I used to when he was little. "Mom, am I stupid?" he whispered. Those words broke something inside me. "No, baby. You're brilliant. Don't ever think otherwise." But even as I said it, I knew Tom's laughter was already echoing in Mason's head, planting seeds of doubt I'd spend months trying to pull out. When I returned to the dining room, Tom was scrolling through his phone, completely unbothered. "Tom, that was cruel," I said, keeping my voice steady. He looked up, genuinely confused. "What? I'm just being honest. The kid needs to know the real world doesn't hand out participation trophies." I felt anger rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. "He's 13. He needs encouragement, not mockery." Tom shrugged. "Maybe if you pushed him harder instead of coddling him, he'd actually achieve something." The words hung in the air between us. I wanted to tell him to leave, to never come back, but something held me back. Maybe it was hope that he'd apologize, or fear of being alone again. Instead, I just cleaned up dinner in silence while Tom sat there, completely unaware he'd just crossed a line he could never uncross. The next morning I got a call from Westfield Middle School. My heart dropped. Calls from the principal's office were never good news. "Ms. Carter, this is Principal Andrews. Could you come in today? I'd like to discuss Mason." My mind raced through possibilities. Had he gotten in a fight? Skipped class? I agreed to come in during my lunch break, anxiety twisting my stomach into knots. Principal Andrews greeted me with a warm smile, which immediately confused me. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about Mason's progress this year." I braced myself for bad news, but it never came. "Your son is exceptional, Ms. Carter. Not because of his grades, though those are perfectly respectable, but because of who he is as a person." I blinked, caught off guard. He continued, "Mason has been volunteering during lunch periods to tutor younger students who struggle with reading. He does it on his own initiative. The impact he's had on these kids is remarkable." Tears pricked my eyes. I had no idea Mason had been doing this. Principal Andrews leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "There's something else." He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. The label read, "Confidential, Harvard Summer Scholars Recommendation." My hands trembled as I picked it up. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Principal Andrews smiled. "Every year, Harvard runs a summer program for exceptional middle school students. Not the highest achievers academically, but students who demonstrate extraordinary character, leadership, and compassion. I've nominated Mason." My heart swelled with pride so intense it hurt. The selection process is rigorous. Only 12 students nationwide are chosen. "But Ms. Carter, I believe Mason has a real chance." I couldn't speak. I just held that envelope like it was made of gold. When I picked Mason up from school that afternoon, I wanted to tell him everything. But something made me hesitate. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, noticing my watery eyes. "The principal called me in today," I said carefully. His face went pale. "Am I in trouble?" "No, baby. The opposite." I told him about the nomination, watching his expression shift from fear to disbelief to cautious hope. "But Mason, you can't tell anyone yet. Not until we hear back from Harvard. Can you keep it secret?" He nodded solemnly. "Not even Tom." I hesitated. After last night, I didn't want to give Tom another opportunity to crush Mason's spirit. "Not even Tom," I confirmed. Mason seemed relieved. That evening, we celebrated quietly with ice cream and his favorite movie. For the first time since Tom's laugh, I saw my son smile. Then the doorbell rang. It was Tom, and he wasn't alone. Tom stood on my porch with a teenage boy I'd never met before. "Hope you don't mind," Tom said, walking in without waiting for an answer. "This is my son, Chase." Thought it was time the boys met. Chase was tall, confident, everything Mason wasn't on the surface. He wore a Letterman jacket and carried himself like someone who'd never been told no. "Chase is top of his class at Riverside Prep," Tom announced proudly, clapping his son on the shoulder. "Full AP course load, varsity track, debate team captain." I forced a smile. "That's wonderful. Mason, come say hello." Dinner was torture. Tom dominated the conversation, listing Chase's achievements like he was reading off a resume. "Chase just got accepted into a prestigious summer program at Yale," Tom said, looking pointedly at Mason. "For gifted students only. Pretty selective." Mason pushed his food around his plate, barely eating. I tried to redirect the conversation, but Tom kept circling back to comparisons. "What activities are you in, Mason?" Chase asked. It wasn't unkind, just curious. "I help tutor some younger kids," Mason said quietly. Tom snorted. "That's not really an activity, bud. Chase means like sports, clubs, things that actually matter for college." The words hung in the air like poison. I saw Mason's jaw tighten, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Tutoring matters," I said firmly. "It matters a lot." Tom waved his hand dismissively. "Sure, but it's not exactly impressive." Chase looked uncomfortable, glancing between his father and Mason. I wanted to end the dinner right there, but I held my tongue, reminding myself of what was coming. Soon Tom would see exactly who Mason was. The following weekend, Tom invited us to a barbecue at his friend's house. I didn't want to go, but Mason said it was okay. "I can handle it, Mom," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. The backyard was full of Tom's friends and their families. Kids ran around playing while adults stood in clusters, drinking beer and laughing. Tom immediately launched into his favorite topic. "My son Chase is heading to Yale this summer," he announced to anyone within earshot. Then he looked at Mason and added, "Mason here is more of a steady student. Nothing fancy, but he tries hard." The group chuckled politely. My face burned with embarrassment and rage. Later, I overheard Tom talking to a group by the grill. "Yeah, my girlfriend's kid barely passes his classes," he said, loud enough for people to turn and look. "Nice kid, but not exactly Ivy League material, you know?" Laughter rippled through the group. I felt frozen, unable to move or speak. Then I heard a crash. Mason had been carrying a plate of food and dropped it, plastic shattering on the concrete. He didn't bend to pick it up. He just walked away, out the side gate and down the street. I ran after him, calling his name. By the time I caught up, he was 3 blocks away, tears streaming down his face. "Why does he hate me?" Mason asked, his voice breaking. "He doesn't hate you, baby." "Then why does he keep saying those things?" Had no answer. I just held my son while he cried on a stranger's lawn, and I made a decision right then. Tom had crossed his last line. That night, after Mason fell asleep, I confronted Tom in my living room. My voice was low but steady, every word deliberate. You will never humiliate my son again. Tom leaned back on my couch like he owned it. I'm not humiliating him. I'm preparing him for reality. The world's tough, and you're not doing him any favors by pretending otherwise. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, I said. You've been cruel. He laughed, that same dismissive laugh that had started this whole mess. You're too soft. That's why Mason's soft. He needs a real father figure, someone who'll toughen him up. He needs someone who'll build him up, not tear him down, I said. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed firm. And if you can't do that, then you need to leave. Tom's expression hardened. He stood up, towering over me. You know what your problem is. You baby that kid. You make excuses for him. Maybe if you actually pushed him to be better instead of celebrating mediocrity, he wouldn't be such a loser. The word hung between us like a slap. Get out, I said quietly. Excuse me. Get out of my house. Now. Tom stared at me for a long moment, then grabbed his jacket. Fine. I'm done with losers anyway. Both of you. He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I stood there in the silence that followed, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. But underneath the hurt was something else. Relief. And a fierce, protective love for my son that burned brighter than any pain Tom could inflict. A week passed in peaceful silence. No texts from Tom, no surprise visits. Mason seemed lighter without him around, like he could finally breathe again. Then one afternoon, Mason burst through the front door, waving a thick envelope over his head. Mom! Mom, it came. My heart stopped. I knew immediately what it was. Mason ripped open the envelope with shaking hands, pulling out multiple pages. He read silently, his eyes growing wider with each line. I got in, he whispered. Mom, I got in. I grabbed him and pulled him into a hug so tight he laughed. I'm so proud of you, I said, tears streaming down my face. Inside the envelope was the acceptance letter, program details, and a copy of Principal Andrews' recommendation. I read it aloud, my voice breaking with emotion. Mason Carter demonstrates exceptional empathy and leadership. His voluntary mentoring of at-risk students shows a maturity and compassion rare in someone his age. He wrote an essay about resilience that moved our staff deeply. Mason represents the very best of what we hope to nurture in young people. Mason's eyes were wet. Principal Andrews wrote that about me. Every word, I said. We celebrated with takeout and stayed up late talking about Boston, Harvard, what the summer would be like. Mason fell asleep on the couch, still clutching the acceptance letter. As I covered him with a blanket, he stirred and mumbled. Can we invite Tom to dinner? I just want him to see. My stomach twisted. Mason, are you sure? He nodded sleepily. I need him to know. I'm not what he said I was. My protective instinct screamed no, but I understood. Mason needed this closure. Okay, baby. We'll invite him. I texted Tom the next morning. Mason would like you to come to dinner Friday night. 6 p.m. Kept it simple, neutral. 3 dots appeared immediately. Finally came to your senses, he replied. This about getting back together. I ignored the question and just sent. Just dinner. For Mason. He agreed. When Friday arrived, I made pot roast, nothing fancy but Tom's favorite. Mason was nervous, checking his reflection in the bathroom mirror 3 times. You look great, I assured him. And remember, you have nothing to prove to anyone. But I understood. Sometimes you needed the people who doubted you to see how wrong they were. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. Tom stood there in a button-down shirt, freshly shaved, holding flowers. For you, he said with that charming smile I'd once fallen for. Behind him stood Chase, looking uncomfortable in a polo shirt. Brought Chase along. Hope that's okay. I forced a smile. Of course. Come in. Dinner started quietly. Tom made small talk, acting like nothing had happened, like he hadn't called my son a loser and stormed out a week ago. "So, Mason," Tom said, loading his plate with pot roast. "Any new report cards worth framing?" The smile on his face was mocking. Chase stared at his plate, clearly embarrassed by his father. Mason didn't flinch. He simply reached beside his chair, pulled out the envelope, and slid it across the table to Tom. "Actually, yes. There's something I'd like you to see," Mason said calmly. Tom picked up the envelope with a smirk, clearly expecting another mediocre report card he could mock. He pulled out Principal Andrews' letter and began reading aloud in a patronizing tone. "Mason Carter demonstrates exceptional empathy and..." His voice faltered. The smirk faded. He continued reading silently now, his face shifting from amusement to confusion to something that looked almost like shock. "What is this?" he asked. "Keep reading," Mason said quietly. Tom pulled out the acceptance letter. His eyes scanned the page quickly. I watched his face go through a series of expressions. Disbelief, realization, embarrassment. "Harvard Summer Scholars Program," Tom read aloud slowly. "Selected from a nationwide pool of applicants. 12 students chosen for exceptional character, leadership, and compassion." The room was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Chase leaned over to read the letter. "Whoa," he said softly. "Dad, that's incredible. Harvard only takes 12 kids." Tom's face had gone red. He set the letter down carefully like it might burn him. "Well, that's very nice, Mason. Congratulations." His voice sounded hollow. Mason didn't smile. He just looked at Tom with steady, calm eyes. "You laughed at me. Remember that." The words were simple but devastating. Tom opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," Mason said. There was no anger in his voice, just truth. Chase looked at his father with something like disappointment. "Mason, this is really cool. You totally deserve it." Tom shot his son a warning look. "Chase." "No, Dad. He does deserve it. You were wrong." I felt my heart swell watching Chase defend Mason. Tom tried to recover his composure. "Well, it's a nice little program. Cute that they picked you." He forced a laugh that came out strained. "I mean, it's not Yale, but it's something." The desperation in his attempt to diminish Mason's achievement was almost pathetic. "It's Harvard," Chase said, his voice firm. "Dad, stop. Just stop." Tom's face went darker red. "Chase, that's enough." "No, it's not enough. You've been ripping on Mason for weeks, and now he gets into something amazing and you still can't just say you're proud of him." Chase's voice rose. "Why do you have to tear everyone down?" The father and son stared at each other across the table. I'd never seen Chase stand up to Tom before. "You don't talk to me like that," Tom said, his voice low and dangerous. "Then stop acting like this," Chase shot back. "Mason's a good guy. He didn't deserve what you said about him, and you know it." Tom stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We're leaving. Now." Chase didn't move. "I'm serious. We're leaving." Tom's voice was sharp. Chase looked at Mason, then at his father, then slowly stood. "I'm sorry," he said to Mason. "For all of it. You deserved better." As they headed for the door, Tom turned back. His pride was clearly wounded, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. "You think this makes you special," he said to Mason. "It's one summer program. It doesn't change what you are." "And what's that?" asked coldly. Tom looked at me. "Average. He's average, and you know it." Then he was gone, Chase following reluctantly behind him. The door slammed shut, leaving Mason and me standing in the dining room. Mason's hands were shaking slightly, but his face was composed. "You okay?" asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I just needed him to know." I needed to see his face when he realized. I pulled my son into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. Not because of Harvard, but because you stood up for yourself with grace and dignity. That night, after Mason went to bed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chase. "I'm sorry about my dad. You and Mason deserve better. What he's been saying isn't okay. Mason seems really cool, and that Harvard thing is legitimately impressive. I hope he has an awesome summer." I showed the message to Mason the next morning. He smiled, a real genuine smile. "Chase is all right," he said. The weekend passed quietly. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Tom would slink away, embarrassed, and we'd never hear from him again. I was wrong. Monday morning my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Ms. Carter. This is Richard Brennan. I'm the director at Westfield Community Center, where Tom works." My stomach dropped. "Yes. I wanted to give you a courtesy call. We've received some concerning information. Tom has been telling people that you used connections to get Mason into this Harvard program, that the whole thing was rigged. He's been quite vocal about it." My blood ran cold. Of course, Tom's pride was wounded, so he was lashing out the only way he knew how, with lies. "That's completely untrue," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I understand," Mr. Brennan said. "I'm not calling to accuse you. I'm calling to warn you. Tom's been spreading this story to parents at the center, and some of them are influential in the school district. I wanted you to be aware." I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking with rage. How dare Tom try to poison Mason's achievement? Principal Andrews called an hour later. "Miss Carter, I've heard some rumors circulating. I want you to know they're completely baseless. Mason earned his spot through his own merit. Harvard doesn't accept recommendations from anyone without thorough vetting. No amount of connections could change that." "Thank you," I said, relief flooding through me. "However," he continued carefully, "I would advise keeping some distance from Tom. People like him don't handle rejection well, and he seems intent on causing problems." I sat at my kitchen table after the call ended, anger boiling in my chest. Part of me wanted to confront Tom, to scream at him for being so petty and cruel. But another part of me, the wiser part, knew that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted a reaction, drama, proof that he'd gotten under my skin. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I called the community center and volunteered to help with their after-school mentorship program. If Tom wanted to spread lies, I'd respond with action. I'd show everyone exactly who Mason and I were, not with words but with deeds. Mason joined me at the center the following week. We spent 3 afternoons helping elementary kids with reading and math. Mason was patient, kind, encouraging. The younger children adored him. I watched him work with a struggling second grader, never once making the child feel stupid or less than. That was who my son was. No lie Tom told could change that truth. Weeks passed. Mason threw himself into helping at the community center. He developed lesson plans, created fun games to make learning enjoyable, stayed late to work with kids who needed extra help. Other parents noticed. They approached me with compliments, thanking me for raising such a thoughtful young man. Tom's rumors seemed to fade into background noise, drowned out by the reality of who Mason actually was. Principal Andrews contacted me again. "There's a local journalist doing a piece on youth mentorship programs. She'd like to interview Mason." My first instinct was to say no. We'd had enough attention, enough drama. But Mason surprised me. "I want to do it, Mom. Maybe it'll help other kids see that grades aren't everything." The interview happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The journalist, a kind woman named Sarah Chen, sat with Mason in the community center's library. I watched from a distance as they talked. Mason was articulate, humble, genuine. He talked about struggling with some subjects, about feeling like he wasn't smart enough, about how helping other kids taught him his worth wasn't defined by test scores. "The kids I tutor don't care about my grades," Mason said. "They just care that I show up, that I listen, that I make them feel like they can do hard things." Sarah's eyes were wet by the end of the interview. "Your son is remarkable," she told me afterward. "The world needs more kids like him." 1 week later, the article published. The headline read, "Local teen empowers youth through resilience." The photo showed Mason surrounded by smiling elementary students, all of them holding books. Within hours, it was shared hundreds of times on social media. My phone exploded with notifications. Friends, family, even strangers shared the article. "This is what real success looks like," one comment read. "Forget test scores. This kid is changing lives." Another said, "His parents should be so proud." I was proud, overwhelmingly so. Mason handled the attention with his characteristic humility. "It's not a big deal, Mom," he said. "I'm just helping some kids." But it was a big deal. Not because of the recognition, but because the world was finally seeing what I'd always known. My son was extraordinary. Then, 3 days after the article published, I received a message request on social media. From Tom. "Can we talk?" It read. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to block him and move on. But curiosity won. "What do you want?" I replied. "To apologize. To explain. Please. Can I come by?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. He showed up that evening, looking smaller somehow. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "I saw the article," he said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "I'm not here to make excuses. What I did, what I said, it was wrong. All of it." I crossed my arms, waiting. "Can I come in?" "No," I said. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it from there." Tom nodded, accepting the boundary. I was jealous. Of Mason, of you, of the way you two have each other. My relationship with Chase is complicated. I took that out on you both, and that was cruel. His voice cracked. "I lost my job, by the way." The confession hung in the air. I felt no satisfaction in his pain, just a weary kind of sadness. "Why did you lose your job?" Yes. Tom looked at his feet. "My boss saw the article about Mason. He asked me about it, said he'd heard I knew the kid. I tried to play it off, but then he asked if I was the one spreading rumors about the program being rigged." He paused. "Turns out one of the board members at the community center has a kid in that Harvard program too. She did her research, found out the rumors came from me. My boss said I was creating a toxic environment and let me go. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. "I'm sorry you lost your job," I said, and I meant it. "But Tom, you did this to yourself." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I understand what I did was wrong. And I wanted to tell you. Mason deserved that recognition. All of it. He's a good kid. Better than I ever was at his age." There was a long silence. "Is there any chance?" Tom started. "No," I cut him off. "There's no chance. You showed me and Mason who you are. We believe you." His shoulders sagged. "Can I at least apologize to him?" I glanced back into the house where Mason was doing homework at the kitchen table. "That's not my decision to make." Called Mason to the door. He came slowly, guardedly. Tom looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. "I'm sorry, Mason. For everything I said. You're not average. You're not a loser. You're incredible, and I was too insecure to see it." Mason stood there, studying Tom's face. The silence stretched between them. Finally Mason spoke. "I forgive you," he said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry anger around." Tom's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "But Tom," Mason continued, "forgiving you doesn't mean I want you in my life. What you said hurt. Made me doubt myself. I'm just now starting to believe in myself again. I can't risk someone tearing that down." There was a wisdom in my 13-year-old son that took my breath away. Tom nodded, accepting the boundary. "I understand. I hope you have an amazing summer at Harvard. You've earned it." Then he looked at me. "I have nowhere to go," he admitted. "I've been staying with a friend, but that's only temporary. I know I have no right to ask, but..." "No," I said firmly but not unkindly. You taught me something important, Tom. Not every apology means you're sorry. Sometimes it just means you're uncomfortable with the consequences of your actions. Tom flinched at the truth of it. You're right, he said. I'm sorry for asking. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, you're an amazing mother. And Mason's lucky to have you. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders slumped, and drive away. Mason stood beside me. You okay? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, I think I am. We went back inside, closed the door, and didn't look back. Tom had been a chapter in our lives, a painful one, but it was over now. We had bigger, better things ahead of us. The weeks leading up to the Harvard program flew by. Mason and I prepared together, shopping for clothes, reading about Boston, researching the program's curriculum. Principal Andrews called to check in regularly, his excitement matching our own. Mason's essay about facing cruelty with kindness moved the selection board to tears, he told me during one call. They specifically mentioned it in their acceptance letter to me. Your son has a gift for honesty and compassion. I hadn't read Mason's essay. He'd worked on it privately, never showing me the drafts. Can I read it? I asked him that night. He hesitated, then handed me his laptop. I read through, tears streaming down my face. The essay was titled, The Laugh That Changed Me. In it, Mason wrote about Tom's mockery, about how it made him question his worth, about the pain of being judged solely on grades. But then the essay shifted. He wrote about choosing to respond with kindness instead of bitterness, about how mentoring younger kids taught him his value wasn't in test scores but in how he treated others. Someone once laughed at my report card and called me average, he wrote. But I learned that average grades don't make an average person. How we treat people when they're struggling, how we lift others up when they're down, that's what makes us exceptional. I'm grateful to the person who laughed at me because it pushed me to discover who I really am. And I'm more than okay with that person. I closed the laptop and pulled Mason into a hug. You wrote about Tom. I didn't use his name, Mason said. But yeah. He taught me something important, even if he didn't mean to. What's that? That my worth isn't determined by people who don't see my value. It's determined by how I see myself and how I treat others. The drive to Boston took 6 hours. Mason was quiet for most of it, nervous energy radiating off him. Principal Andrews had insisted on meeting us there, driving separately to attend the opening ceremony. I wouldn't miss this for anything, he'd said. When we arrived at Harvard's campus, I felt small among the historic buildings and perfectly manicured lawns. Mason's eyes were wide, taking it all in. We checked into the dormitory where he'd be staying for the next 6 weeks. His roommate, a kid from California named James, was friendly and immediately started chatting about the program schedule. I helped Mason unpack, folding his clothes into drawers, trying not to cry at the thought of leaving him here. Mom, I'm going to be fine, Mason said, reading my expression. I know, I said. I'm just proud. So incredibly proud. That evening, all the families gathered in a large auditorium for the opening ceremony. Principal Andrews found us in the crowd, beaming with pride. There he is, our scholar. The program director, a distinguished woman with gray hair and kind eyes, welcomed everyone. Then she announced that one student would be giving a short speech, chosen based on their application essay. Please welcome Mason Carter from Westfield, Oregon. My heart stopped. Mason's eyes went wide with surprise. Principal Andrews nudged him forward with an encouraging smile. Mason walked to the podium, his legs slightly shaky. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the same essay I'd read nights before. When he spoke, his voice was quiet at first, then grew stronger. I want to talk about what it means to be strong, he began. Mason's voice filled the auditorium. Someone once told me I was average. They laughed at my grades and said I'd never amount to anything significant. For a while I believed them. He paused, looking out at the audience. Parents leaned forward. Other students watched intently. But then I realized something. The people who tear others down aren't strong. They're scared. Strong people build others up. Strong people show compassion even when it's hard. Strong people choose kindness over cruelty, especially when they've been treated cruelly themselves. I watched faces in the crowd react. Some parents dabbed their eyes. Principal Andrews stood in the back, arms crossed, smiling with pure pride. I'm here today not because I'm the smartest person in this room. I'm probably not even close. I'm here because I chose to respond to mockery with action instead of anger. I chose to help others instead of feeling sorry for myself. And I learned that real success isn't about grades or awards or proving people wrong. It's about staying true to who you are, even when people tell you that's not enough. The room was absolutely silent. So to anyone here who's ever been told they're not good enough, I want you to know something. You are enough. Your worth isn't measured by test scores or what critics say about you. It's measured by the kindness you show, the lives you touch, and the courage you have to keep being yourself even when the world says you should be someone else. He folded the paper and stepped back from the podium. For a moment nobody moved. Then the applause started, building from a few people to everyone in the room, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. After the ceremony, parents and students swarmed Mason. People shook his hand, complimented his speech, shared their own stories of overcoming doubt and criticism. Principal Andrews pulled me aside, his eyes glistening. That young man is going to change the world, he said. Mark my words. I watched Mason interact with other students, confident but humble, exactly who he'd always been. That night I drove home alone, my heart full but aching with missing him already. The house felt empty without Mason's presence. But I knew he was exactly where he needed to be. 3 weeks into the program, Mason called. Mom, you won't believe this. The program director wants to use my speech in their promotional materials. She said it represents everything they want the program to be about. I could hear the excitement in his voice, the confidence. This was my son coming into his own. That's incredible, baby. I'm so proud of you. How are things there? He asked. Quiet, I admitted. But good. Really good. What I didn't tell him was that Tom had tried to contact me twice more. I'd ignored both messages. There was nothing left to say. Then a week later I received an unexpected call. Ms. Carter. This is Tom. Please don't hang up. Almost did. I just wanted you to know I watched Mason's speech. Someone posted it online and it went viral. Over 1 million views now. I pulled up social media and saw he was right. The video had exploded, shared by educational groups, parenting forums, even some celebrities. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. He mentioned me in that speech, Tom said quietly. He didn't use my name, but I knew. And he was right about everything. I was scared and insecure, and I took it out on him. Why are you calling me, Tom? I asked tiredly. Because I want you to know something changed in me. Watching Mason, seeing how he handled my cruelty with such grace, it made me look at myself. Really look. I didn't like what I saw. He paused. I've started volunteering at a youth center in my new town. Working with at-risk kids. Trying to be better. I'm not asking for forgiveness or to be part of your lives. I just wanted you to know that Mason changed me. His words, his example, they mattered. I sat with that for a moment. I'm glad you're working on yourself, Tom. Genuinely. But Mason and I have moved on. I hope you understand that. I do, he said. Tell him thank you if you ever get the chance. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. The call ended. I sat in my quiet house, processing the conversation. Part of me was glad Tom was trying to change. But the bigger part of me knew that his growth wasn't our responsibility. Mason had planted a seed simply by being himself. But what Tom did with that seed was his own journey. When Mason came home 6 weeks later, he was different. Taller somehow, though I don't think he'd actually grown. More confident in his skin. More certain of his place in the world. He had stories about new friends, challenging classes, late-night conversations about changing the world. Harvard wants me to apply for their undergraduate program when I'm old enough, he said casually one day, like it was no big deal. They have a special track for Summer Scholars alumni. My heart swelled so much I thought it might burst. The local paper wanted to interview him again. This time the headline read, "From B student to Harvard scholar. Local teen proves worth isn't measured in grades." Parents in our community stopped me at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the library. "Your son inspired my daughter to start a tutoring program at her school," one mother told me. She watched his speech and said she wanted to help people like Mason does. 3 months after Mason returned home, the community held its annual Humanitarian Awards dinner. Principal Andrews called to tell me Mason had been nominated for the Youth Leadership Award. "I didn't even know there was such an award," I said. "It's new this year," he admitted. "The committee created it specifically because of Mason. They wanted to honor students who demonstrate exceptional character and service." The ceremony was held at the community center where Mason had first started tutoring. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same place where Tom had spread his lies months ago. Now Mason was being celebrated here. We arrived to find the room packed. Families, teachers, community leaders, even the mayor attended. Mason wore a suit we'd bought together, looking so grown-up it made my chest ache. When they called his name, the entire room rose to their feet before he even reached the stage. The applause was deafening. The director of the community center presented the award, a crystal trophy engraved with Mason's name. "This young man has mentored over 30 children in the past year," she announced. "He's improved reading scores, boosted confidence, and created a model for peer mentorship that we're implementing district-wide. Mason Carter represents the very best of what community service means." Mason took the microphone, that same calm presence he'd shown at Harvard. "I accept this award on behalf of every kid who's been told they're not good enough," he said. "Every student who struggles, who works hard but doesn't get straight A's, who feels invisible. You're not invisible. You matter. And your worth isn't determined by grades or awards or what anyone else thinks of you. It's determined by who you choose to be when nobody's watching." After the ceremony, people lined up to congratulate Mason. Young kids asked for his autograph. Parents thanked him for inspiring their children. I stood back, watching my son handle it all with grace and humility, and I thought about how far we'd come. From that terrible dinner when Tom had laughed at a report card to this moment, watching Mason receive recognition for being exactly who he'd always been. Kind, compassionate, determined. Principal Andrews found me in the crowd. "I have something for you," he said, handing me an envelope. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a letter on Harvard University letterhead. "Dear Mason," it read. "Based on your exceptional performance in our Summer Scholars program and the continued impact you've made in your community, we would like to extend an early expression of interest in your future application to Harvard College. While this is not a formal admission offer, we want you to know that you represent exactly the type of student we hope to welcome to our institution." I looked up at Principal Andrews, tears streaming down my face. "They never do this," he said quietly. "Early interest letters for middle schoolers. Unheard of." But Mason made an impression that went far beyond academics. They see what I've always seen, a young man with unlimited potential who leads with his heart. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. This wasn't about Harvard or awards or recognition. It was about a boy who'd been told he was average and chose to prove that average was a word that had no meaning when applied to human worth. That night, back home, I found Mason in his room. He'd placed the Humanitarian Award on his desk next to the Harvard acceptance letter from the summer program. But what caught my eye was something else. The old report card from that terrible dinner, the one Tom had laughed at, now framed and hanging on his wall. "Why did you frame that?" asked. Mason looked at it thoughtfully. "Because it reminds me of who I am. Those B's and that one A represent hours of hard work, late nights studying, subjects that didn't come easy." Tom laughed at this, but I'm proud of it. It shows I don't give up, even when things are hard. Underneath the framed report card, He'd written something in careful handwriting. I stepped closer to read it. For Mom, who taught me what real strength looks like. Who showed me that defending someone you love is more important than keeping the peace. Who never stopped believing in me, even when I doubted myself. Thank you for choosing me every single time. My vision blurred with tears. I pulled Mason into a hug, holding him tight. I'll always choose you, I whispered. Always. He pulled back and smiled at me, that same smile I'd seen since he was a baby. I know, Mom. That's why I'm okay. That's why I've always been okay. Because I had you. We stood there in his room, surrounded by evidence of his achievements, but none of it mattered as much as this moment. Just a mother and son who'd weathered a storm together and come out stronger on the other side. Tom's laughter had been meant to diminish Mason, to make him feel small and insignificant. Instead, it had revealed exactly who my son was. Someone who responded to cruelty with compassion, to doubt with determination, to mockery with grace. Mason didn't need Tom's approval or anyone else's. He had something far more valuable, a clear understanding of his own worth and the courage to live according to his values, not others' expectations. As I turned off his light and closed his door, I smiled softly to myself, whispering the words that had become my truth. That's my boy.